Thereisnocannon. You can't change the past. Welcome, Director Reinders. You are currently viewing a document from TL001A, the Prime Timeline. SCP-5956. Level 5 Top Secret. Containment Class, Antithesis. Disruption Class, Amida. Risk Class, Caution. Special Containment Procedures. As SCP-5956 is a retrocausal predetermined decontainment success, it is contained through enforcement of its effects. SCP-5956 may only be operated by trained and certified personnel, even in emergent situations. The conceptual breakdown of its use appended in the description below does not provide sufficient detail for its safe operation. Any events which are known to owe their occurrence to future use of SCP-5956 are to be recorded with extreme accuracy and, immediately following the completion of necessary self-informed action, reported to the Temporal Anomalies Department. In the event that the Temporal Anomalies Department has ceased to exist, or has never existed in the current timeline, its Prime Timeline counterpart is to be contacted and informed that the current timeline is condemned. Following the fulfillment of all causal loops requiring the use of SCP-5956, it is to be stored at an undisclosed location known exclusively to the Prime Timeline's Director of Temporal Anomalies, presently, Director Reinders. Classification Committee Memorandum. After extensive discussion with Director Reinders, the Classification Committee has classified SCP-5956 as antithesis, denoting an anomaly that must be used to prevent the containment of other anomalies, and itself. Description: SCP-5956 is the Thereisnocannon, a temporal manipulation mechanism allowing the synchronization of one's consciousness at two distinct points in time. When activated, the Thereisnocannon links the user's present consciousness with their consciousness at a chosen point in the past. In effect, one's canonical knowledge and experience can be augmented via intertemporal communication and cooperation with other versions of oneself. SCP-5956 is not known to generate new timelines. Attempts to alter past events using the Thereisnocannon are virtually certain to cause temporal paradoxes, resulting in catastrophic timeline collapses. Instead, it is used solely to initiate causal loops which have already partially occurred. A known side effect of the use of the Thereisnocannon is the inability of one's past self to recall interactions with one's future self. Once the link created by SCP-5956 is severed, one's past self is subject to an antimimetic phenomenon causing them to forget crossing their own timeline. This is not by design, rather, the effect is believed to be a fundamental principle of intertemporal self-interaction. This principle naturally decreases the likelihood of potential paradoxes, as one's past self does not retain knowledge which might cause them to act unwisely in the absence of their future self's immediate supervision. The following conceptual breakdown describes the only safe method of utilizing the Thereisnocannon. Thereisnocannon Protocol, simplified. Given one's past self P and future self F, P becomes synced with F and is provided a set of instructions. P fulfills those instructions, taking care to transcribe them precisely. P is desynced from F and gradually forgets their interactions. P becomes F via the natural progression of time. The Temporal Anomalies Department notifies F that they must contact P, as per the original interaction. F activates the Thereisnocannon to sync with P, providing them with the transcribed instructions. F ensures that P transcribes and fulfills the instructions. F deactivates the Thereisnocannon, retaining their memory of this interaction. Discovery/Origin. On November 23, 2020, Dr. Daniel Sokolsky of Site-43 commissioned Dr. Place H. McDoctorate of Site-87 to construct the Thereisnocannon for use in a high-clearance covered operation. Despite not being notified beforehand, Dr. McDoctorate was found to have already been constructing the anomaly. When questioned, he claimed to presently be synchronized with his future self, who had been instructing him to build the cannon for several weeks. Upon completion, The Thereisnocannon was relocated to Site-120 due to anomalous energy requirements, after which Dr. McDoctorate desensed from his future self, returned to Site-87, and subsequently forgot the entire interaction. As such, it is known that Dr. McDoctorate must be instructed by the Temporal Anomalies Department to activate SCP-5956 on January 1, 2034, thus fulfilling the retrocausality of the events which have already occurred. According to internal records, there are 2 relevant files in this or alternate timelines. To view the next relevant file, click here.
There is no canon. You can't change the past. Welcome, Director Rangers. You are currently viewing a document from TL-5956X, the Paradox Timeline. SCP-001. Level 5 Top Secret. Containment Class, Esoteric. Secondary Class, Apollyon. Disruption Class, Amida. Risk Class, Critical. Special Containment Procedures. As SCP-001 is a paradox-induced recurrent catastrophic containment failure, it is contained through amelioration of its effects on relevant timelines. Each year, on the 8th day of September, the following actions must be taken at Site-43. Any actions timed to the precise second have extremely narrow windows of opportunity. Local time. Actions required. Not applicable. Dr. Aslata must provide precise time signals to PTF Omega 001 via radio for each of the below listed events. 17 hours 17 minutes and 52 seconds, Dr. D. Deering must be informed of his containment duties. One keeper of SCP-001-B must be present. 17 hours 18 minutes and 22 seconds, Dr. Deering must activate the Thereisnocannon and contact his prime timeline counterpart at precisely this moment in 2002. He must speak the following words: "There is no canon." He must request possession of SCP-001-B, then administer an immediately lethal cognitohazard to himself. 18:21. Agent S. Radcliffe must not respond to his radio. 18 hours and 22 minutes, Dr. B. Del Olmo must radio Director L. Lilyhammer and speak the following words: "Something's wrong." 18 hours 22 minutes and 29 seconds, Chief Amukamai must activate the bulkhead seal on Facility AAFD, with all personnel still inside. 18 hours 22 minutes and 36 seconds, Chief Mukamai must sound the evacuation order for the Security and Containment, Applied Occultism, and Archives and Revision sections. 18 hours 22 minutes and 41 seconds, Agent Radcliffe must not respond to his radio. 18 hours 22 minutes and 57 seconds, Chief Mukamai must activate the bulkhead seals on the Security and Containment, Applied Occultism, and Archives and Revision sections, with all personnel still inside. 18 hours 23 minutes and 1 second, Dr. D. Markey must engage Interitis Protocol, destroying the Euclid and Keter class wings of the Security and Containment section. 18 hours 23 minutes and 17 seconds, Agent Radcliffe must respond to his radio with the following words: "Please tell me you're not still in there." 18 hours 23 minutes and 29 seconds, Chief R. Ambrogi must seal the intersectional subway system and engage the vacuum flush mechanism. 18 hours 24 minutes and 53 seconds, Dr. R. Worth must crawl beneath his desk and manually trigger the controlled burning of the Archives and Revision section. 18 hours 25 minutes and 11 seconds. Agent Radcliffe must respond to his radio with the following words: "The concentration cell should be safe. It's just north down that hallway." 18 hours 27 minutes. Chief Janet Wilhelm must order MTFs Alpha 43, Beta 43, and Delta 43 to engage the spectral entities at Facility AAFA. 18 hours 31 minutes. Dr. Del Almo must broadcast stun memetics to all surviving personnel in the Applied Occultism and Archives and Revision sections. 18 hours 34 minutes. Chief Mukamai must direct security and containment forces to neutralize all site personnel within the Applied Occultism and Archives and Revision sections, save for Dr. Worth. The following personnel must perish: blank, Dr. Harold Deering, Dr. Dougal Ibanez, Chief Delphina Lilyhammer, Dr. Lillian McInnes, Director Ellen Nasimbani, Chief No NGO, Dr. N. Hung Okari, Dr. Udo Weddle, Dr. William. Any individuals terminated by new occurrences of SCP-001 must be added to this list. PTF Omega-001 are to keep an extremely accurate record of who amongst them is presently unable to communicate, and are to cycle this inability at regular intervals. All reflective surfaces within Site-43 must be destroyed or otherwise stripped of their reflective properties. Reflective liquids must be diluted such that they are opaque. The memetics and counter-memetics section must ensure that all personnel apply Solution 001A to their eyes on a 4-hour schedule indefinitely. Description: SCP-001 is an annual cascade containment breach/anomalously stable temporal paradox occurring in the Achromatic Abatement, Applied Occultism, Archives, and Revision, and Security and Containment sections of Site-43. Dramatic local reality alterations will revive and subsequently terminate 9 deceased Foundation personnel and damage containment apparatus throughout the site. On September 8, 2002, Dr. Dougal Deering telepathically received a set of instructions from a future version of himself in an alternate timeline. He was directed to transcribe and record the entire conversation, verbatim. Manually shut all esoteric effluence valves voiding into Achromatic Abatement Facility AAFD. Notify janitorial and maintenance personnel of a critical buildup of esoteric substances which, left untreated, would result in a catastrophic containment failure. Ensure that AAFD be fully decommissioned. He was further instructed to take the following actions 20 years hence. Retrieve from Site-120 a device constructed by a Dr. P.H. McDoctorate known as the Thereisnocannon. Utilize the Thereisnocannon to contact the present, 2002, version of himself. Repeat the instructions he had been given precisely, thereby ensuring a stable time loop in which the aforementioned catastrophic containment failure would never occur. After Dr. Deering confirmed that he had understood these instructions, his future self severed the intertemporal link. Though Dr. Deering's recollection of this event soon began to fade, he was able to execute the instructions he had been given by consulting his careful transcriptions. The events of September 8, 2002, detailed below, were the result. Incident Report AAFD I-117. Date: September 8, 2002. Officer of Record, D. Ibanez, Chief of Security and Containment. Consulting, Dr. A. McInnes, N. Nasimbani, Chief of Janitorial and Maintenance, Dr. D. Deering. Summary: at 17:19 hours, Dr. D. Deering detected an impending recondicity event in the Orphic outflow treated by Achromatic Abatement Facility AAFD. Dr. Deering executed an emergency flush of this material into the adjacent facilities, preventing a catastrophic containment breach. After further risk evaluation by Dr. Deering, facility AAFD was officially condemned. At 18:22 hours, during a routine inspection prior to its decommissioning, a loaded spectral grounding conduit burst. The resultant flare of esoteric energy boiled 14 janitorial and maintenance section personnel alive. Addendum: subsequent to this event, the 7 Site 43 senior staff members supervising the decommissioning met in honor of the lost technicians within the shell of AAFD. They expect to meet again on the 10th anniversary of the incident, September 8, 2012, and for all subsequent decennials. For 20 years, no further achromatic abatement-related incidents occurred. In the days preceding September 8, 2022, Dr. Deering placed a request to Director Ashworth of Site 120, asking that the Thereisnocannon be transported to Site 43 for use in a demonstration of temporal mechanics. However, on September 8, 2022, while preparing to fulfill his latter set of instructions, he was informed that neither the device nor any trace of its existence could be found. The events of September 8, 2022, detailed below, were the immediate result. Incident Report 001I1. Date: September 8, 2022. Officer of Record: Aim Yukamai, Chief of Security and Containment. Consulting: Dr. X2, Chief of Quantum Supermechanics, Dr. D. Deering, Chair of Achromatic Abatement. Summary: Dr. D. Deering has inadvertently created a serious temporal paradox and subsequent containment failure via poorly considered timeline manipulation using a device known as the Thereisnocannon. At 17:18 hours on September 8, 2022, Dr. Deering recognized that his actions of September 8, 2002 had somehow retroactively erased the device he had used to undertake them. The resultant paradox initiated a wave front of malignant causal, temporal, and narrative energy which, unchecked, would likely have resulted in the catastrophic restructuring of universal reality. However, this wave front originated at the site of Dr. Deering's paradoxical actions, Achromatic Abatement Facility AAFD, due to a pronounced reaction with residual esoteric material in the decommissioned facility. A much more concentrated effect instead occurred. AAFD was immediately reverted to its 2002 configuration, including its full payload of esoteric effluence, its near-critical recondensity variable, and its backlinks to all other abatement facilities. The recondite material, much of it containing causal, temporal, and narrative elements, interacted explosively with the paradox wave front. All abatement apparatus in the entire facility immediately reached critical recondensity, and the most extreme alterations of reality yet on record followed. Effects included, but were not limited to, the retroactive and asymmetrical erasure of an unknown entity. Increases/decreases in the number of perceptible/mobile temporal dimensions. Spontaneous and exclusively red monochromacy. Dermal precession. Apparition of extratemporal entities. Chronological inversion. Neogenesis in reflective objects. Multiple sets of extrasensory perceptions. Total linguistic and communicative failure. Condensation of vaporous substances, resulting in sharp temperature increase. Nadirosis. Sialuria. Many of these effects have persisted to the present. Detailed report. Just prior to the incident, Dr. B. Del Almo was engaged in an interview with an SCP object in the Security and Containment section. As this entity's existence has apparently been erased by the subsequent events, he is unable to recall the exact nature of their conversation, but he left the chamber convinced that a containment breach attempt was imminent. He headed to the Security and Containment section to radio Dr. Lilyhammer and convey his suspicions. The 7 senior staff members who had supervised AAFD's initial decommissioning were engaged in their memorial activities therein when the breach occurred. They were immediately alerted to the paradox wave front by the sudden transformation of their surroundings. Site Director Dr. L. Lilyhammer radioed the officer on duty outside AAFD, Radcliffe, for a status update. Agent Radcliffe had misplaced his radio, and so did not receive Dr. Lilyhammer's transmission. Dr. Uokari therefore opened the hood on an Orphic outflow pipe to check its recondicity. After a brief visual inspection, she reported that a catastrophic thermic event was now imminent. B. The safety shielding around the pipe had become porous, and C. Her death was likely also imminent. She then removed her hand from the pipe and attempted to move away from the other members of the group. Her muscle mass passed directly through her dermis, carrying most of her skeletal structure and organs with it, and collapsed into a pile of viscera. Her dermis remained standing. The voice of Dr. Del Almo then erupted from Dr. Lilyhammer's radio at a volume high enough to cause permanent hearing damage. Dr. Del Almo's declaration that something's wrong coincided with the collapse of Dr. Okari's dermal layer and a series of audiovisual anomalies indicating the beginning of a mass containment failure in AAFD. Dr. Weddle, startled by the bursts of sound, stumbled backward and struck a wall. His body cascaded outward along the surface until the wall was textured with his clothing and physical features. Dr. Weddle began to scream only once this effect had completed. He did not cease for the duration of the event. Dr. Lilyhammer radioed security and containment and ordered that the AAFD bulkhead be sealed. Chief Amukami carried out this instruction immediately, after consultation with Dr. Del Almo, who had just arrived in her office. She also ordered the evacuation of all workspaces in the vicinity of AAFD. At this point, narrative energy emanating from AAFD reached the anomalous documents storage lockers in the archives and revision section. The spontaneous manifestation of hundreds of small-scale thought forms, reified pataphysical constructs, resulted. The entities constructed their physical forms from the section's extensive collection of printed records. As local reality collapsed in AAFD, Dr. Lilyhammer again radioed Dr. Del Almo to seek advice on the safest location within the facility to take shelter. When Dr. Del Almo did not respond, his radio had been transformed into glass. Dr. Lilyhammer radioed Agent Radcliffe, who still had not yet located his own radio. Dr. Blank physically accosted Dr. McInnes and accused him of causing the present calamity with his incompetence in 2002. Dr. McInnes appeared incapable of response. Former Chief Nasimbini was attempting to interpose himself between them when a rapid superstructural change filled the space he was occupying with a load-bearing member, pulverizing his internal organs and killing him instantly. Chief Mukami sealed the archives and revision section. She then received reports that all security and containment staff in the containment wings above Applied Occultism, and all Applied Occultism staff, had been showered in Orphic outflow by a critical backwash from the overloaded AAFD facilities and converted to liqueform entities. These entities were presently engaged in breaching containment for all surviving Euclid and Keter-class anomalies. Simultaneously, 2 containment chambers were obliterated by spectral superheating and their supposed occupants retrocausally erased from reality. Chief Mukami activated the bulkhead seals for these 2 sections as well. Containment specialist Dr. D. Markey concluded that the captive anomalies could not be allowed to become compromised by the transmogrified staff, and enacted Interitis Protocol. Shaped charges obliterated the containment chambers, and their occupants, dealing considerable structural damage to the site as a whole. Agent Radcliffe recovered his radio, and noted the 2 missed transmissions from Dr. Lilyhammer. He attempted to contact her. His message was not received, as upon entering AAFD the radio wave took physical form and began pinging off of the remaining intact abatement apparatus, setting off a series of explosions throughout the facility. Janitorial and Maintenance Chief R.M. Broggie became aware that AAFD's sealed intersectional subway station had become unsealed, and the subway was filling with a miasma of recondite material. He shut down the system and engaged the vacuum flush mechanism. The recondite material was forced down the line to the venting mechanism at Facility AAFA, on the Lake Huron coast. The vents immediately solidified into a mass of human bone, and AAFA itself soon filled with recondite material. Within 1 minute, all personnel in that facility had suffocated. Chief Ibanez stepped into the path of a warm gust of air, and inexplicably froze. Dr. Lilyhammer attempted to push her out of the way, but Chief Ibanez's body had apparently become elastic. It wrapped around Dr. Lilyhammer like a large rubber balloon before bursting, covering her in bodily fluids. Dr. Blank collapsed against a wall, sobbing uncontrollably. The thought forms in ANR had by now achieved complete canonization, fusing into a single pataphysical construct composed primarily of papier-mâché newsprint tentacles. It expanded its body mass by consuming the clothing worn by ANR personnel after converting their bodies into a slurry of organic material, which it then discarded. This slurry remained mobile, and emitted vocalizations consistent with extreme distress and/or arousal. Dr. Worth retreated to his private office, hid under his desk, and activated the pyroclastic charges beneath ANR. The paper-based thought forms were immediately incinerated. Dr. Worth survived, as his metal desk was shielded from the worst effects of the fire when a solid cloud of ash covered it. A being resembling Dr. Weddle approached the senior staff in AAFD, carrying an S&C service weapon. The real Dr. Weddle's screams could still be heard emanating from the walls. The being spoke the following words to Dr. McInnes: "You did the best you could. It wasn't your fault, and nobody blames you. We'll fix this together." Dr. McInnes did not respond. The being then pointed the weapon at Dr. McInnes, and pulled the trigger. Dr. McInnes' corpse fell to the ground, then disappeared along with the apparition of Dr. Weddle. Dr. Lilyhammer and Dr. Blank resumed their flight through AAFD. Agent Radcliffe received Dr. Lilyhammer's latest plea for help, and successfully responded. He advised her and Dr. Blank to take cover in the AAFD concentration cell, which was equipped with high-effectiveness abatement devices. He provided them with accurate instructions for reaching the cell, unaware that the entire facility had just undergone a Euclidean shift and reversed its cardinal directions. The Pursuit and Suppression Section was dispatched to AAFA to inspect the compromised facility. AAFA was found to be empty. 1 kilometer away, at Ipperwash Beach, MTFs Alpha, Beta and Delta 43 encountered the former staff of AAFA, now entirely spectral in nature, engaged in the wholesale massacre of a polar bear swim event. Limited engagement with abatement fluid dispatched the entities with no casualties, but all 3 MTFs suffered heavy subsequent losses when the water level of Lake Huron rapidly rose to meet them, and an entity resembling JNM technician Philip E. Deering began pulling them below the surface one by one. AAFD was filled with an almost impenetrable red glare and multiple shifting visual dimensions. Dr. Blank lost his balance and attempted to steady himself on a paraspectral grounding conduit. His arm instead passed through, and he was immediately converted to a large Solanum lycopersicum, tomato, specimen which fell to the ground, bounced into Dr. Lilyhammer's path, and was crushed beneath her shoe. Dr. Lilyhammer stopped running, looked down at Dr. Blank's remains, and was still examining them when all remaining pipes and conduits burst simultaneously, obscuring her from camera view. She was subsequently found in the same position after the event subsided, transformed at the atomic level into a mannequin constructed from plywood and oil-based paint. SNC discovered that the sealed bulkheads separating archives and revision and applied occultism were buckling, although the security cameras were no longer transmitting visual data. Audio tracks consistent with A, the percussion of meat and bone, and B, the steady pumping of liquid were received. Theorizing that the transmogrified personnel might still be conceptually human, Dr. Del Almo broadcast wide-spectrum stun memetics to both sections. After 3 minutes, the audio ceased. The bulkheads were sheared open, and SNC personnel armed with abatement fluid hoses and flamethrowers neutralized all remaining personnel within the affected areas, save for Dr. Worth. In the confusion following these events, Dr. Deering confessed to senior site personnel his responsibility for the temporal paradox he had incurred. While such a temporal paradox would normally have collapsed and reverted the timeline, it appeared that the breach had inexplicably granted an anomalous stability to this alternate reality which allowed it to persist. The effects of this persistence were continuously felt worldwide. The societal and economic infrastructures of the general public began to collapse within days, as the simultaneous occurrence and experience of multiple sets of conflicting events only worsened with the passage of time. This K-class event and the breach which caused it were classified SCP-001. Site-43 became the most stable center of human civilization. The remaining research staff theorized that SCP-001 had achieved some level of sapience, perhaps acquired from the beings it had annihilated, and was intentionally preserving the place of its birth from complete destruction. Dr. Deering proposed that the creator of the Thereisnocannon, Dr. Placeholder McDoctorate, be located and questioned as to its whereabouts. It was hoped that Dr. Deering could still fulfill his instructions and revert the paradox breach. Dr. McDoctorate was retrieved from Site-87 in a state of high paranoia and disarray and transported to Site-43, having spent the duration of his journey frantically claiming that the authors had left us. When questioned, Dr. McDoctorate claimed to have no knowledge of Thereisnocannon. When informed by Dr. Deering that a future version of Dr. McDoctorate had invented the device, and had supposedly passed the requisite information on to his earlier self, Dr. McDoctorate claimed that no such contact had ever occurred. After extensive deliberation, Dr. McDoctorate began the attempted construction of the Thereisnocannon with the assistance of Site-43's quantum supermechanics section. During this time, and across several subsequent breaches, a number of persistent sub-anomalies of SCP-001 became apparent. SCP-001-A is an apparently sapient being dwelling within all reflective surfaces in or around Site-43. This being resembles former janitorial and maintenance technician Philip E. Deering. It is wearing his uniform, and resembles his appearance at the moment of his death on September 8, 2002. Its skin is red. Its burst eyeballs have run down its face and onto its uniform jacket, and it jerks erratically when it moves. SCP-001-A is almost uniformly hostile to the personnel of Site-43. Any individual coming within range of a reflective object is in immediate danger of violent attack. SCP-001-A attacks have included, but have not been limited to, personnel being pulled bodily through large mirrors without breaking the glass, resulting in their complete loss. Personnel being physically scratched and clawed, resulting in serious injuries which fester and do not heal. Personnel being pulled bodily through small mirrors without breaking the glass, resulting in their painful dismemberment and, typically, death. SCP-001-A is capable of manifesting in more than one surface at a time, although its movements are uniform across instances. The observed upper limit of these instances is 14 separate bodies. SCP-001-A has demonstrated passive behavior when confronted with the person of its brother, Dr. Dougal R. Deering. When Dr. Deering is present, SCP-001-A prefers to vocalize. These vocalizations take the form of a monotone litany of Dr. Deering's achievements at the SCP Foundation, and his many personal virtues. At no point will SCP-001-A look directly at Dr. Deering, and he alone among the personnel of Site-43 cannot hear its vocalizations. All reflective materials at Site-43 have been either made opaque or kept under strict containment procedures to prevent SCP-001 a manifestation. Specialized eye drops, Solution 001-A, developed by the Memetics and Countermemetics section prevent SCP-001-A from manifesting on the lenses of human eyes, although these drops must be administered every 4 hours to remain effective. Manifestation of SCP-001-A on a subject's eyes immediately induces them to burst, and brain death soon follows. SCP-001-B is a cognito-linguistic phenomenon surrounding a specific string of 41 characters from the Latin alphabet and Arabic numeral set. That this string possesses a meaning in English, Dr. 1 Dougal 2 Deering 3 cannot forechange 5 the 6 past, has furthered theories that SCP-001 is a sentient entity attempting to punish those individuals it deems responsible for its creation. Each time SCP-001 recurs, a new member of Site-43's personnel acquires a new instance of the string, joining the ranks of its keepers and acquiring its anomalous effect, the complete loss of all ability to communicate with other sentient beings. When a non-keeper vocally requests an SCP-001-B instance from a keeper, the instance is transferred, the former keeper regains their ability to communicate, and the non-keeper loses theirs. The keepers of SCP-001-B become conceptually vague to their fellow staff members, and as they cannot communicate, they are unable to indicate their status as keepers. The affliction worsens over time, leading to the complete conceptual invisibility of all long-term keepers. For this reason, detailed records must be kept of who has lost their ability to communicate, and instances of SCP-001-B must be regularly cycled between all personnel to prevent a loss of manpower until the next causal loop resets the effect. The number of SCP-001-B instances at play increases by 1 each time the causal loop repeats. In 2026, the Memetics and Countermemetics section proposed disposing of one iteration of SCP-001-B each year by presenting it to Dr. Deering shortly before his scheduled death. Dr. Deering has agreed to this burden each year, though it renders him incapable of communication in his final moments and appears to cause him considerable emotional trauma. SCP-001-C is Lake Huron, one of the largest freshwater lakes on Earth and the only one known to have attained sentience. The lake, located near Site-43 and forming the center of the former Nexus 94, is actively hostile to all human life and constructions. Immediately following the initial containment breach, the lake anomalously increased its pressure level and destroyed all underwater facilities and utilities connected to the site, then began expanding outward beyond the logical limits of its volume. When the surrounding communities, save for Site-43, were abandoned or destroyed, the lake receded to its previous waterline. Any objects coming into contact with SCP-001-C are immediately absorbed. The lake has been known to issue recognizable exclamations of pain when absorbing particularly large or heavy material. Similarly, the lake on occasion issues cries consistent with those of Lynx canadensis. A significant proportion of SCP-001-C now lies beneath Site-43, in the caverns formerly occupied by the now incorporated mythological creatures of the Nexus, and the lake is therefore in active conflict with SCP-001-D. SCP-001-D is the bedrock surrounding Site-43. This bedrock exhibits evidence of biological and occasionally even sentient behavior, including increases and decreases in size consistent with the act of respiration, causing significant damage to the outer membrane of the site's superstructure. The periodic absorption of any material coming into contact with it, whether organic or inorganic. Emission of an opaque liquid substance triggering hallucinations and uncontrollable depression when visually perceived. Periodic vocalizations of the name Vivian. Over the course of 1 year, Dr. McDoctorate, through strenuous experimental development and brute force, developed a functional prototype of the Thereisnocannon. However, to compensate for its enormous energy requirements, several side functions, including achromatic abatement and security and containment duties, were temporarily disabled. This was predicted to provide enough power for approximately 30 seconds of intertemporal synchronization across a 21-year duration. On September 8, 2023, Dr. Deering prepared to use the Thereisnocannon to synchronize with his past, 2002, self. He had communicated to site personnel that he no longer trusted the instructions he had been given in 2002, and had no desire to prevent the containment failure he had prevented in that year. Instead, he intended to instruct his former self to allow the 2002 breach to occur, in the hopes this would restore the correct version of the timeline. After meticulous recitation of his plans, Dr. Deering entered the quantum supermechanics section of the site and activated the cannon. Meanwhile, site personnel began to notice a gradual increase in both local anomalous activity and temporal instability. First thought to be symptoms of Dr. Deering's correction of the timeline, these reality alterations were allowed to continue uninhibited until 1821 hours, at which point the 3 sections affected by the original event were anomalously reverted to their 2002 configurations. All personnel killed during that event were spontaneously resurrected, and the containment failure occurred for a second time. Ill-prepared for this recurrence, site personnel did not correctly repeat their actions from the previous year. This resulted in the survival of Drs. H. Blank and L. Lilyhammer, who had apparently become infused with the energies released during the containment failure. Dr. Blank had gained the ability to induce false memories. Dr. Lilyhammer had gained the ability to manifest viral parasitic memes. They used their newfound powers to endanger the mental and physical health of site staff, displaying malicious and isolationist intents for reasons unknown. Following these events, Dr. Deering was found in the quantum supermechanics laboratory facility, deceased by a self-exposure to a lethal cognitohazard. It is known that he activated the Thereisnocannon prior to his apparent suicide and, in so doing, likely terminated his prime timeline counterpart prior to his prevention of the 2002 breach. His actions are likely to have prevented the events detailed in this file from occurring in baseline reality. They should also have resulted in the collapse of this alternate timeline, which has not thus far occurred. Dr. Deering left the following note to explain his actions.
Philip, you might think I don't love you. After what I'm about to do, you might become certain I don't love you. You're never going to hear from me again, and you might not ever know why. I hope that someday, somehow, you'll understand the reasons behind the things that I've done. I suspect our resourceful extratemporal overlords are already looking over my metaphorical shoulder, hoping this confession will help them to understand what went so terribly wrong in this worst of all possible timelines. They'll probably never let you read this letter. I'm going to maintain the fiction that I'm speaking to you, however, Philip, because the idea that my death will mean your life is the only thing keeping me going. I always resented you for my success. Can you think of anything pettier? Me, with my 2 doctorates in my super-secret laboratory, irritated beyond belief by your laziness and lack of ambition. The more vital I became to the Foundation, the more I hated to imagine my brother pushing a mop down some god-forsaken sewer hole. As if having a working man for a brother somehow undermined my own achievements. And then I undermined them myself. Let me tell you the story of my failure. When I received that fateful call from my future self, you didn't even know we were working at the same facility. I'd kept that from you. I didn't want to see you. I didn't want people to know you were my brother. And then that voice started speaking in my head. There were two of me, he and I if you like, and he told me that if I didn't do some very specific things very quickly, there was going to be a disaster. It was going to kill 7 people, and leave you a miserable wreck. And 20 years later, I was going to try to relieve you of your burden, and that was going to get you killed. I don't even remember what it felt like, receiving that knowledge, but there's a security camera in my office, so I know what it looks like it felt like. It looks like it felt like someone had told me the entire world was about to end. I wish you could have seen what that knowledge did to me. I wish that was how you could remember me, not cold and callous and permanently disapproving, but absolutely terrified at the thought of losing you to a slow decline and a sudden demise. You would have known what you'll never know now, what I didn't know until that moment. I love you, and I could never bear to lose you. I lost you anyway. I did what that damned voice told me to do. I stopped the breach it promised me would ruin your life, would one day take it. I set the decommissioning in motion, and I watched with satisfaction as you took that place apart, pipe by pipe. I was watching when you died. When they all died. And now you are watching me, every minute of every hour of every day. A twisted reflection of you, a mockery of the man you were, a reminder of how stupid a man I was when I dialed in that device and placed a call across the gulf of time. And you know what the best thing is? In 2022, there was a disaster that killed 7 more people. Not because I didn't do something, this time, because I did. That's why you're watching me, of course. Because it's all my fault. You're my own personal albatross now, Philip. I don't want to believe it's actually you, of course. The things you've done, the notches you've added to my list of failures, but, more than once, late at night, when the red-rimmed walls close in and I can't sleep and I can't keep my eyes closed against the throbbing in my head, I open my closet door and stand in front of the only remaining mirror in Site 43. And you won't look at me. I've decided it doesn't matter if that is you, or not. It's not going to be you for long. I'm going to bring you back, not for me, not for anyone else trapped in this endless hell, but for the people at the other end of this forked road. I'm going to bring you back, I'm going to bring all of them back, by making one last mistake to cancel out the very first one. I'm going to put a bullet in the brain of the man who caused this, and you're not going to die in 2002, and you're not going to die in 2022, either. I'm going to write a better story. I can't live without you. But, after what I've done to you, I hope you can live without me. Your brother, Dougal.
The special containment procedures for SCP-001 ensure that each reprise is identical to the original breach, because each reprise is identical with the original breach. These are not reenactments, but are rather reoccurrences of the actual historical event. Failing to adhere to the special containment procedures will actually change the course of history. As September 8, 2022 recedes further into the past, the potential for these new realities to diverge further from baseline increases exponentially. Each of the personnel killed in 2022, as well as Dr. Deering, deceased 2023, and Drive NGO, deceased 2027, will be returned to life by SCP-001 60 seconds before the moments of their deaths. They are sapient human beings with physical forms and agency, and will behave as they did in the years in which they died so long as their respective contextual triggers are received. If they are interfered with, they may survive to wreak havoc on Site-43, and containment of SCP-001 will have failed. The 9 personnel who were not killed by SCP-001 but directly participated in its containment: Chief R.M. Brokey, Chief Janet Wilhelm, Dr. D. Markey, Chief A. Mukamai, Dr. B. Del Almo, Agent S. Radcliffe, Dr. R. Worth, and, later, Dr. D. Deering and Dr. A. Zlata, have self-organized into Provisional Task Force Omega-001. They are tasked with replicating their original actions as perfectly as possible. Should they be successful, reality will restructure into a timeline marginally less prejudicial to the survival of the remaining site personnel. While a collapse to baseline reality is theoretically possible, it is not known how many correct containments would be required to achieve this. Further experimentation with containment of SCP-001 has produced mixed results. An attempt was made in 2025 to more effectively orchestrate PTF Omega-001's containment duties by appointing an additional staff member to provide precise time signals and cues. This resulted in Dr. Adrijan Zlata becoming incorporated into SCP-001 as a containing individual. The other members of the task force performed notably less effectively the next year, suggesting that they have become entangled with SCP-001 by virtue of their actions in relation to it, and 2, their competence at handling the anomaly is finite, and divided equally between them. Subsequent to this event, all surviving personnel have been forbidden to aid PTF Omega-001 in their containment duties.
Why do we do this? Why don't we just give up? Because there is always hope. There is always hope. Every time we get it right, our lot in life improves. Every step we take towards a more perfect containment of SCP-001 is another step homewards. But even if we never really make it, even if we're doomed to live this nightmare out year after year for all eternity, we must take solace in the fact that our actions are ensuring that somewhere across the gulf of multiversal space, another reality is spared the horrors we witness daily. We do this not only for ourselves, we do this for all ourselves. Survive, conserve, persist. Anhung Angio, Psychology and Parapsychology.
Addendum, Incident Report 001I2. Date, September 8, 2027. Officer of Record, Aim Yukamai, Chief of Security and Containment. Summary: Dr. R. Worth was badly injured by SCP-001-A on his way to perform his containment duties. Drive and NGO attempted to replace him at his post in Archives and Revision, but arrived late. Confronted by the Prime Thought Form, she was unable to reach the pyroclastic charges. She instead attempted to activate the fire control systems in the section, resulting in a deluge of ectoplasmic material from AAFD. At the conclusion of the breach event, security and containment agents attempted to rescue Dr. NGO. They discovered instead that the entirety of the ANR office wing was filled with anomalous objects resembling tape reels crudely constructed from pig iron. They were collectively found to contain several 100,000 meters of, primarily, audio tape. The removal of the reels, 2,128 in total, revealed that Dr. NGO was not present in Dr. Worth's office. The contents of the reels are as follows: 1,322 reels of Dr. NGO reciting her stream of consciousness during an average day. 324 reels of Dr. NGO speaking to a silent therapist about invasive, upsetting, guilt-inducing thoughts and dreams she had experienced. 198 reels of Dr. NGO speaking to said therapist about extremely personal, and often graphic, traumatic incidents from her life. 184 reels of a mocking male voice repeating selections from the preceding 1,844 reels at 10 times speed. 122 reels of extremely fine microfilm containing further stream of consciousness accounts, in film script form, covering the majority of Dr. NGO's life. 98 reels of screams, some extremely brief, some several hours long, all identifiably in Dr. Ngio's voice. One recording of sustained weeping, again identifiable as Dr. Ngio's. One reel with no apparent contents, constructed from Dr. Ngio's nerve and glial cells. These reels and the tape they contain are indestructible. Attempts to subject them to achromatic abatement procedures have produced a toxic gas which itself cannot be properly abated, resulting in the deaths of 7 junior researchers. Update September 8, 2031. Dr. Ngio's death has been incorporated into SCP-001, and therefore recurs each year. The tapes are regenerated, but tapes which have already been created do not disappear. Proposals have been made to dispose of Dr. Ngio's remains in either SCP-001-C or SCP-001-D, but the uncertain effects of inadvertently cross-testing these anomalies are a cause for concern. Furthermore, Dr. Worth's extrication from archives and revision has been immensely complicated by the appearance of Dr. Ngio's remains, which badly batter him upon manifestation. Approximately 2 hours of labor is required to extricate him, during which his injuries cannot be treated. The Pursuit and Suppression section has provided him with body armor to ameliorate these effects. Dr. Worth also reports that Dr. Ngio recognizes him shortly before her death, and expresses confusion and a sense of betrayal when she does so. He has been unable to seek counseling for these experiences, as the site now boasts no qualified therapist. The reel of nerve and glial cells exhibits progressive signs of corrosion which worsen with each occurrence of SCP-001, consistent across each iteration. The remaining 2,127 reels do not degrade.
There's always hope, Anhung? Do you still feel that way? For my part, I hope you can't feel anything. Reuben Worth, Archives and Revision. There's a way out of this mess, and I'm going to find it. Until that day, keep performing your duties, keep up your spirits, and keep drawing breath. Ph. McDoctorate, Quantum Supermechanics.
Addendum, Incident Report 001I3. Date, September 8, 2033. Officer of Record, Aim Yukamai, Chief of Security and Containment. Summary, place is missing. Since his invention of the Thereisnocannon in 2023, Ph. McDoctorate has been invaluable in his capacity as Chair of Quantum Supermechanics. For the past year he has been highly focused on the construction of a new device, allowing his mental and physical health to decline in the process. He has been incredibly secretive about the intended function of this machine, and, when pressed, claimed he was going to find a way to write a better story. Dr. McDoctorate was last seen by Agent S. Radcliffe today at approximately 1800 hours while he prepared to fulfill his containment duties. Following successful amelioration of the breach, Dr. McDoctorate, the machine he had been constructing, and the Thereisnocannon were all found to be missing. Surveillance systems in all relevant areas had undergone spontaneous failure, for reasons unknown. The loss of Dr. McDoctorate does not bode well for any hope of safely collapsing our reality to baseline. Nevertheless, if our understanding of SCP-001 holds true, the Thereisnocannon should temporarily reappear each year such that it can be used by Dr. Deering to fulfill his containment duties. Update September 10, 2033. After an extensive search of Dr. McDoctorate's office, only one document pertaining to his final project was found, a handwritten note containing the following 3 words: Paradox Exodus Engine. Update September 8th, 2034. There is no cannon.
According to internal records, there are 2 relevant files in this or alternate timelines. To return to the previous file, click here. There is no canon. You can't change the past. Welcome, Director Reinders. You are currently viewing a document from TL001A, the Prime Timeline. The anomalous effects triggered by ill-considered use of the Thereisnocannon, categorized as SCP-001 in TL-5956X, are analogous to anomalous effects categorized as SCP-5243 in baseline reality. On September 8, 2002, Site-43 experienced a cascade containment failure scenario. Every year, this event recurs as SCP-5243. These recurrences are in fact the original event. The affected facilities revert to their 2002 configurations, and any individuals killed by the containment failure are briefly resurrected so that they might reenact their deaths. Should any of these individuals not die, a Class CK reality restructuring event will occur wherein they did not die in 2002, but instead became suffused with esoteric energy and irrationally violent. This creates alternate timelines which can only be corrected if the next year's containment failure is handled correctly. SCP-5243 is also responsible for the creation of several secondary anomalies, the containment of which spurred the initial commissioning of the Thereisnocannon. Simultaneous to the initial containment failure in 2002, Dr. D. Deering of the Applied Occultism section perished for unknown reasons. He is restored to life each year by SCP-5243 and until 2013 always died in the same mysterious manner. Starting in 2013, he survived the events of 5243, for reasons which are also unknown. He is now executed annually by MTF personnel on the assumption that his survival could result in further Class CK events. The Temporal Anomalies Department has identified an incident of concern in alternate timeline TL-5243D which may help to explain these events. Incident Report 5243 ID. Date, September 18, 2016. Officer of Record, D. Ibanez, Chief of Pursuit and Suppression. Summary: Containment of SCP-5243 failed for the fourth time on September 8, 2016 due to the survival of Dr. B. Del Olmo. As an alternate timeline had therefore been created, and as that timeline would inevitably be collapsed by the next successful containment, the annual execution of Dr. Deering became unnecessary. Director A. McInnes ordered that Dr. Deering instead be interrogated, to determine whether he knew why he had been killed by SCP-5243 every year since 2002, and why it was still resurrecting but no longer killing him. A partial transcript follows. Interview log. Date, September 18, 2016. Investigating Agents, D. Ibanez, Chief of Pursuit and Suppression, Dr. Xinyi Du, Chair of Quantum Supermechanics. Excerpt begins. Dr. Deering, I was sitting in my office, minding my own business, when I got the call. Chief Ibanez, the call. Dr. Deering, yes. A man spoke in my head, in the voice of my internal monologue, and told me he was me from the future. From a soon-to-be-dead timeline, just like the one we're in right now. He said that in 2002 something horrible was going to happen to my brother, and that in 2022 it was going to flat out kill him, and that last part was going to be my fault, for trying to make things better. Well, you can imagine how that made me feel. Chief Ibanez, maybe this isn't as relatable an experience as you think. Dr. Deering, just listen, alright? He told me I could prevent it all. He told me there was going to be a massive containment breach, that it was going to kill 7 people, that it was going to create all sorts of persistent and problematic anomalies. That my brother was going to get saddled with one of them for the rest of his life. Chief Ibanez, wait, you're Phil Deering's brother? All he got was a mirror monster that calls him names. Dr. Deering, that's Okay, well, the voice said it was much worse than that. And he said that eventually I'd try to fix it, and that would get him killed. But if I stopped the triggering event, none of it would happen. Nobody would. Philip wouldn't die. What was I supposed to do? Chief Ibanez reported to me. Dr. Deering, he told me not to. He said the only way to keep the timeline damage to a minimum was for me to dump the effluence out of AAFD, stop it from blowing, stop the whole disaster from occurring. And that's what I was trying to do. Chief Ibanez, except you died. Dr. Deering, well, I don't remember that part. Chief Ibanez, of course you don't. But it's happened every single year until 2013, when suddenly we needed to start doing it, manually. Dr. Deering, wait, what? Chief Ibanez, never mind that. What do you think could have changed? Something in the future? Dr. Do, well. Chief Ibanez, yes, well what? Dr. Do, well, I did some consultation with Dr. McDoctorate at Site 87 before everything went pear-shaped. He had a theory. So, the version of Dr. Deering who called our Dr. Deering was from a dead timeline. When that timeline collapsed, his call was set in stone. It could never not happen. Chief Ibanez, sure, okay. Dr. Do, what if there's an alternate timeline that isn't unstable? A persistent one? With another Dr. Deering, who's free to call his earlier self every year, over and over, and kill him. Look at or listen to a cognitohazard, and kill them both using the link between them? Chief Ibanez, why would he do that? Dr. Do, to stop our Dr. Deering from stopping the breach, I would imagine. Maybe it caused more problems than it solved. Chief Ibanez, and why would that have ceased to happen in 2013? Dr. Deering, well, assuming he called me every year, maybe something happened to him, or the device that let him make the call. Chief Ibanez considers. Chief Ibanez, but if this alternate you killed UU, we need better terminology for this than 5243 didn't kill UU. So why is it bringing you back every year? Dr. Do, maybe it isn't. Maybe Dr. Deering isn't entangled with 5243, but with whatever is going on in the alternate timeline. Dr. Deering, none of this is really a problem, though, is it? Chief Ibanez, why do you say that? Dr. Deering smiles. Dr. Deering, because as long as you execute me every year, even if the breach keeps on breaching, my brother isn't going to die in 2022. I won't be around to do whatever it was I did. Chief Ibanez, and that's good enough for you? Silence on recording. Dr. Deering, no. But what matters is that it's good enough for him. Excerpt ends.